Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Mark Moss Show, where we talk about the decentralized revolution and the way the world is changing from a world of centralization, central planning, central banking, to a world of decentralization, which means more power and control back into you as an individual person, getting away from central planning to individual planning, away from central banking and back to unbanking or independent personal banking. Of course, we look at it through the lens of politics, finance, and technology. And there's so much going on with all of that. So we try to keep up with the flow of information so we can see this. I know a lot of times I get thousands of messages a week across all my social media platforms, which, by the way, if you're not following me on social media, please do. You can find me at @OneMarkMoss on most platforms. Or just go to my website at onemarkmoss.com, and I have all of it listed there. But I get thousands of comments a week across my social media. I try to get to most of them if I can. Not all the ones on YouTube. There's just so many there. But I try my best to get to as many as I can. And the one thing that I see all the time is like, Mark, when is this going to happen? When will the dollar lose its status? When will the dollar collapse? When will the new system take over? Right? And it's not when. It's not a process. It's an event. Let me say that again. I said it backwards. Sorry. It's not an event. It's a process. What do I mean by that? So it's a process. It's that it goes for over a long period of time. I think it was Mark Twain. Forgive me if I'm wrong on this attribution of the quote, but they said, how'd you go broke? And they said, I went broke gradually and then suddenly. And so there's like this gradually then suddenly kind of a thing. And so if you look at the United States dollar, took over the reserve status of the world's reserve status from the pound sterling 100 years ago. But it didn't happen all at once. It was a process, not an event. It happened over about a 40-year period where the UK just continued to destroy their currency by continuing to print more and more money, by devaluing it. And to the point where it was devalued so much they had to give up all their gold. The United States got all the gold and thereby was the strongest economy and the strongest currency in the world because it was backed by gold, and thereby took over as the world's reserve currency. This was a long process, a 40-year process. Now, the pound sterling is still there today. It's still being used. So again, it's a process, not event, a 40-year process before the U.S. dollar was kind of recognized as taking over, but it's still there today. So when do these things happen? They are happening right now. And that's exactly what we're looking at. Now, we look at it through the lens of politics, finance, and technology. Those are the three cycles that are converging right now. Of course, the technology piece is Bitcoin, which is this decentralized technology that we need in order to really usher in this change that's happening. And it is here, and it's happening fast. Now, one thing that we look at when it comes to Bitcoin is everybody likes to point to the fact that the price of Bitcoin is down. How good is this asset if the price is down? It's not a good medium of exchange. It's too volatile. It's not a good store of value because look how far it's off of their high. Well, those things are true. I can't debate that. Now, we can look at the nuance of those things. So, for example, Bitcoin's holding up pretty dang good considering where other risk assets are. So we could make that argument. We could say that it's been certainly a good store of value if you just zoom out and look over like a 2-year period instead of a 6-month period. So we can pick and choose our periods if we want to do that. But ultimately, what I would say is that when you're looking at new technologies, especially a technological revolution such as Bitcoin, you don't want to look at the price. I say this all the time. If you've been listening, thank you for your support. But I've said this to you over and over and over, right? We don't look at the price. Imagine when Uber raised money to start building out in Silicon Valley. They didn't go public for over a decade. So you didn't see the price of Uber changing every day based off of this new city picked them up, this city banned them, etc. And so when we're looking at something like Bitcoin, a technological revolution, the price doesn't really give us the true data. So what we want to look at is two things. We want to look at the growth of the network. So in Uber's case, are we getting more drivers? Are we getting more riders? Are we getting more cities? That's the growth of the network. Then we also want to look at the development happening on the network? Are they adding in new services, Uber Eats, things like that? And so with Bitcoin, we can see the same thing. And one of the big telling signs is the growth of the network. And we saw this week that the difficulty gauge of Bitcoin rose by 13.5% from the last adjustment roughly 2 weeks ago. What does that mean? Well, that means that the Bitcoin mining difficulty has surged to an all-time high. What does that mean? There's more people mining Bitcoin. The network has grown to a level of all-time highs. There's more people actively working in the network and providing security to the network than there ever has been before. So while the price, the US dollar value, might be down, first of all, if we price Bitcoin in Turkish lira, for example, the price of Bitcoin is actually way up. So we have to look at what you're measuring it in. If you measure it in US dollars, the price is down. But that's the thing we shouldn't really be paying attention to if we're trying to zoom out and see what's really going on. We want to look at the growth of the network, and we can see that it has grown massive. As a matter of fact, the current network hash rate, this is the amount of power that all the computers are using to secure the network, is 257 million terahashes per second. And this time last year, it was around 140. So it went from 140 to 257 in 12 months. That is a massive rise in power, participation, and security on the Bitcoin network. Now, this difficulty adjustment, what does that mean? So what it means is that right now, there's way more people mining Bitcoin, bringing new Bitcoin in the space. And so what happens is it adjusts the difficulty. So what do I mean by that? So if the price of gold shot up, it's a whatever, $1,600 an ounce today, let's say it went up to $10,000 an ounce, a lot more people would go to mine gold. There'd be gold mines popping up all over the world, new equipment bringing as much gold as they could out of the ground. And that would increase the new supply of gold really fast. That would create inflation. But with Bitcoin, it's different. If Bitcoin jumps from its price today of roughly 20,000 and say it went to 100,000 like that, more people could jump in and mine, but there would be no new Bitcoin, no additional Bitcoin coming out. It's just how much Bitcoin is split between the people that are there. So that's the difficulty adjustment. So about every 2 weeks, it adjusts that number, the ratio, the percentage of what people get. And so what happens is now people are making less and less money because there's so many people doing it, right? It's grown. So what happens is the people that aren't profitable, let's say they're paying 10 cents for their power, they have to turn their machines off. And when they turn their machines off, that's more Bitcoin for the rest of the miners. And then let's say the price keeps dropping. Well, the next batch of unprofitable miners have to drop off, and the people that are left get more of it, and so forth. And also, it works in opposite. And so as more people jump in, they get less of it. It works the same way, which is why this week we saw Senator Elizabeth Warren leads a congressional group's probe into Bitcoin mining energy in Texas. Imagine a group of Democratic lawmakers from Washington, D.C. Senator Elizabeth Warren is from Massachusetts. Imagine them going to Texas, trying to tell Texas how to handle their power. Texas is not on the global grid. They have their own internal grid. So the fact that they're going to go there and try and demand that Texas answers to them is pretty funny. But really the whole thing behind it is just shows a lack of knowledge of what they're even talking about. They say that they express concerns that Bitcoin's mining enormous demand for energy is straining the state's grid, adversely impacting consumers and climate goals. So Bitcoin has to have the cheapest power available. So Bitcoin can't compete for customers. It can't participate in California where it has to compete. It has to go where there's cheap power. Why is there cheap power in some places? Because there's surplus. There's energy being created that's not being used. And that's one of the reasons why Texas has picked up so much energy. And so, again, we can see that this is growing at a rapid rate. We can see that the network is growing. We can see the development is growing on the network. And so, instead of being focused on the US dollar valuation price, we want to stay focused on those two things, the growth of the network and the development on the network. We talked about how the new CPI, Consumer Price Index, the prices went back up again. As a matter of fact, it went up much higher than expected, surged to more than 8.2%. And, the core CPI strips out the food and energy, which is crazy because those are the two things that we need the most. But even with stripping those things out, we still went up at the highest rate since 1982, surpassing the recent 6.4% highs that we hit in February and March. Now, even worse than that is that economists had expected the rate increase to be much, much less than it was. But what we're seeing now, the monthly figures show that it's actually accelerating. And of course, the Federal Reserve is trying to decelerate. The Federal Reserve is trying to tackle it. They're trying to get it back down to 2%, but instead, it's going back up. It's a big problem. Now, the news sent the stock futures price plunging, right? The investors revised their views of what the Fed's next moves will be. So everybody's waiting for this pivot, the pivot. When will the Fed stop raising rates? When will the Fed start easing the monetary supply again? And so we're waiting for this move, and everybody thought that maybe, just maybe, if we started seeing the inflation numbers come down, they would pivot sooner than later. Maybe this year. I was thinking maybe this year. But it looks like, based off of this new data that came out, this is probably not going to be the case. But let's talk about it from a different angle than I've already talked about it from before. So what does this mean? Well, it means lots of things, right? We could sit here and talk about all the different angles and all the things that it means. But one of the things that it means is that because CPI has been revised up, what it means is that the cost of living goes up. We've talked about that. I'm not going to dig super deep into that, but the cost of you having to buy gas for your car or food for your grocery cart has gone up. Your cost of living has gone up. Now, part of the thing that the BLS does by providing this number, the CPI data number, is it shows the cost of living, which then the Social Security Administration uses to decide how much money to distribute out to Social Security recipients. And this is a big deal, and it might be a big problem. And so what we're talking about is that Social Security payments are now set for a really, really, really big increase. And so it looks like tens of millions of Americans on Social Security are about to get what may be the biggest raise of their lifetime. All right, it says the U.S. government is set to announce how big a percentage increase Social Security beneficiaries will see in monthly payments this upcoming year. It's certain to be the largest in 4 decades. So the largest pay raise that these Social Security beneficiaries get. Now, there's plenty of controversy accompanies that move. It says known as a cost of living adjustment, or COLA, C-O-L-A, cost of living adjustment. Now, critics say the data the government uses to set the increase doesn't reflect what older Americans are actually spending, and thus the inflation they're actually feeling. Yes, we've talked about extensively over and over and over how manipulated that number is. So yes, it doesn't really reflect what they're paying. So many of the tricks they do, so for example, they have something that basically adjusts it by swapping out items. So the cost of living index, the CPI, used to include steak, and now it just includes hamburger. But you still get meat. And so thereby, since we went from steak to hamburger, the price didn't go up. As a matter of fact, it went down. They also do something based off of performance. So let's say that they changed gasoline, and now gasoline is supposed to be cleaner or more fuel efficient. They'll say, well, because the performance went up in the gasoline, we're not going to include the cost of it going up. Because your computer got more powerful, we're not going to count the cost increase of the computer, which is insane because we still have to put the money out. Our cost of living still went up. There's lots of controversy. I could spend an entire show talking about all of that, and I will if you want me to. So hit me up on social media at @OneMarkMoss and let me know if you think I should. But we can see that, as they're saying, lots of controversy because it doesn't reflect what people are actually spending. And also because the increase is a one-size-fits-all, which means beneficiaries get the same raise regardless of where they live. So, for example, if you live in Southern California, that pay raise may not be near enough than it would be if you lived in South Dakota or something like that, or Kansas, right? Or another country. Now, I've been doing a lot of work with international diversification. I was recently speaking at the Nomad Capitalist event down in Mexico City, and I can tell you that if you're on Social Security and your budget is tight, you might want to consider moving out of the country. You can move to Turkey. You can move to Colombia. You can move to Brazil, and you could have a 10x quality of your life for less money than you pay now. You can have a full-time cook and a full-time cleaner and a full-time chauffeur and a beautiful house for like $2,000 a month. So your Social Security would go much further. So anyway, payments are going to go up, which is good if you're on Social Security. I mean, everybody wants more money, sure. It looks like those payments will begin probably in about January. They'll be permanent. Now, since the year 2000, the typical increase has been about 2.5%. But now with the numbers of inflation, it looks like that's going to be 400% more, 500% more, which is going to be a pretty big deal. But what does this mean in bigger sense? All right, this is pretty interesting. So if you haven't been paying attention, you probably should. It's something I kind of pay attention to because I've paid into Social Security my whole life. At some point, maybe I'd want to pull out of it. But it looks like Social Security is set to run out by 2034. 2034. That's 12 years from now. So that means that there's probably not going to be any Social Security by the time I get to the age in time to start drawing from that. And so it's already set to. This was actually in February of this year. They said it's going to set to run out, and now they're going to have to pay out even more money, which means they're going to run out even sooner. So that's a big problem. So, of course, there's plenty of reasons why they want to manipulate the numbers to keep the Social Security number down, the cost of living increases down, so they don't have to pay out more money, so they don't run out even faster than what they were planning on. And that's going to be a big problem. So if you're planning on Social Security in the next, after 12 years from now, you should probably adjust what you're doing. Come up with Plan B. Because it's going to be a big problem. And what's exaggerating the problem is also the ability to even earn any money with interest rates so low, the economy crashing, and so forth. It's going to be a big problem. We can see that this the end of the financial era that we've known is coming to an end. I talk about it extensively. Maybe the world went into, 5,000 years, gold was money. Then the whole world went into this new financial agreement in 1944 under the Bretton Woods Agreement, where we still had the gold being money, but now the dollar was pegged to gold and other currencies were pegged to the dollar. And so we still kind of had this commodity-based money. In 1971, though, President Richard Nixon severed the ties to the gold standard, so removed the dollar's backing to gold. And so since then, the world has been in free fall. We've been about 51 years into a financial experiment. And we went from Bretton Woods 1, started in 1944, potentially we could say 1971, led us to Bretton Woods 2 unofficially. We went into this basically fiat monetary system that we have today. And now it is changing again. And we can see that it's coming to an end. We're only 51 years into this financial experiment, an anomaly throughout history, where thousands and thousands of years, pretty much all of recorded history, gold has been money, and now we're in this kind of fake fiat monetary system. And we can see how fast this is unraveling. And so it's easy to see that it doesn't have much more legs. Now, the central banks, the Federal Reserve, has been pretty good about pulling some rabbits out of the hat, pretty good at pulling some magic tricks. However, kicking the can down the road, so to speak. We don't know how many more they have. Potentially they have more, but we can see that it is getting dire. I want to look at a couple things that I'm looking at that kind of show this. And so the point of seeing these signposts is trying to understand when this happens. So we saw this week the IMF slashes, not just cuts, not just reduces, but slashes global growth estimates, warning, unfortunately, I hate to tell you, warning that the worst is yet to come, they say. You think things are bad now? Oh, just wait, they're about to get even better. Oh no, worse, they say. The global economy is headed for, quote, stormy waters, end quote, the International Monetary Fund said this week. It cut its projection for growth next year and warned that high inflation was worsening living conditions. So you think it's bad for you in the United States. What about other countries where they're seeing prices go up by double, 100% in months, and they already live on $3 or $4 a day? Imagine that. It says here that the global economy will grow 2.7% in 2023, down from a projected 3.2% this year and 6% in 2020. So it's growing way down, 6% in 2020, going down to 2.7%. So think about that. for a second. Actually, I'm gonna put that on pause. I'll come back to that. It says the global economic activity is experiencing a broad-based and sharper than expected. It's always more than they expected, right? All these PhDs, all these economists, all this data, and they just can't ever seem to get it right. Of course, they can't tell you what the weather's going to be like next week. They can't tell you what is going to happen with inflation. How the heck are they going to tell you what the weather's going to be like in 100 years from now? Just stop and think about that for a second. But let's keep going here. Global economic activity is experiencing a broad-based and sharper than expected slowdown. We didn't expect for it to get this bad. We thought we'd just shut the whole economy down and then turn it back on again. And then we have too much inflation, so we'll shut it back down again. But we didn't expect it to be this bad. With inflation higher than seen in several decades. Who would have thought? It's sharper than expected, they say. Now, it says here that the IMF sees global inflation hitting 8.8% for 2022. That's up from 4.7% last year. So 8.8% inflation globally. Now, this means that in some places it goes up less, in some places it goes up way more. But let's just look at this global number that the IMF is putting out. So they're expecting inflation to go up by 8.8%. They're expecting the global economy to grow by 2.7%. So that means, yes, we are growing much slower. We're producing way less goods and services. Your wealth is going up way slower than the cost of living. That means everybody in the world, on the entire globe's cost of living, or I should say quality of life, standard of living, is going down because we're growing much, much slower, 2.7%, much slower than inflation is at 8.8%. They said, the IMF said, quote, monetary policy should stay the course. Look, they just said here, they said experiencing sharper than expected slowdowns. So they didn't expect things to get this bad. But never mind. We didn't expect for them to be this bad. It's way worse than anybody thought. But never mind. Stay the course. Fiscal policy should aim to alleviate the cost of living pressures while maintaining a sufficiently tight stance aligned with monetary policy. So let's break that down. So we have monetary policy and we have fiscal policy. What's the difference? Monetary policy is what the central banks do. Monetary policy, what the central banks increase the monetary supply, the base, the money base. But it's not super effective because all they can do is give reserves to the banks. Now, money doesn't really get printed by the Federal Reserve like the meme says, and like I say all the time, I hope you understand that. Money isn't printed by the Federal Reserve. Money is actually created by the banks. So the Federal Reserves give their reserves to the banks. Now the banks create the money into existence by issuing loans. But if you and I don't borrow, if I don't go get a car loan, an auto loan, a house loan, an RV loan, a boat loan, a credit card, if I don't borrow, then no new money's created. And if no banks want to loan me money, no money's created. So that's monetary policy. Fiscal policy is what the government does. Fiscal policy is sending out you money for welfare or UBI. Fiscal policy is them giving you food stamps and all these other things. That's fiscal policy. So what they're saying is that fiscal policy should aim to alleviate the cost of living pressures. How could they do that? So what they're saying is that as prices keep going up, meaning your gas prices, your energy prices, as they keep going up, then fiscal policy should continue to work to offset that. But if they increase the money supply to help you with your high gas prices or energy prices or food prices, then that means you don't buy less. That means you continue buying the same amount, which means the demand's still there. And if the demand is still there while the supply goes down, doesn't that mean prices keep going up? I mean, the thinking here, it just amazes me. So the Fed is trying to crush demand. They want to make you broke so you can't afford these things anymore. But the IMF is saying that fiscal policy should aim to alleviate those cost of living pressures. How? By giving you money. So while the Fed is trying to make you more poor, then that's the monetary policy is making you poor. The fiscal policy should be giving you money. But where do they get the money from? Oh yeah, they create it. Do you see what they're dealing with here? And you can start to see very quickly why they are out of moves. They are out of moves. Somehow, per the IMF, they are supposed to restore price stability. So monetary policy should stay the course to restore price stability by crushing demand to take away your money. But fiscal policy should alleviate that while maintaining a sufficiently tight stance aligned with monetary policy. But they work against each other because the monetary policy is trying to make you more poor so you don't buy as much, but the fiscal policy wants to give you the money of the difference so you can continue to buy the stuff that you always had. There's 8 stages of a democracy, about a 250-year lifespan of a democracy. I'm not going to tell you all the stages, but the final stages are intellectualism, decadence, which I think you've seen that. Then it goes to dependence, which is what they're talking about, and then ultimately bondage. Those are the last 4 stages. You can guess which stage we're in. Before the break, I talked about the 8 stages of a democracy or an empire, and the 4 final stages are intellectualism. We have so much money and so much wealth that people just sit around and think tanks all day imagining this future world with no real world ties, right? So intellectualism, which then leads to abundance, like people buying Bored Apes for $60 million or whatever. There was someone who bought like an invisible piece of art for like $18 million. I think that pretty well highlights the age of decadence. Then we lead to dependence. So dependence is the fiscal policy. The government has to step in and help you, UBI, welfare, food stamps, etc. And then that leads to bondage, where now I'm dependent on the government, and so now I have to do whatever they say. But it's the perversion, the distortion of these monetary policies that we're dealing with right now, and we can see it manifesting itself all throughout society. As a matter of fact, what we can see all over the place, I'm coming to you from California, and we are seeing a massive problem with this in California, but it's even worse in other areas, and that is the rise of violent crimes like we just haven't seen before. It's just insane. And I was looking at this report this week of examined crime data from Baltimore, Chicago, Los Angeles, New York City, Philadelphia, Seattle, and Washington, D.C. I don't know why they didn't put San Francisco on there. That certainly should have changed things. But we got Los Angeles, so California is well represented. But when we look at the data, not the narratives, I'm going to talk about the narratives in a second, but let's look at the data itself right here. And so when we examine the crime data from those cities, Baltimore, Chicago, Los Angeles, New York City, Philadelphia, Seattle, Washington, D.C., just those cities, we found that violent crimes have increased anywhere from 5% up to 40%. All right, now these are violent crimes. All right, these are definitely the crimes you don't want to have happen to you. Let's just say that. I mean, not that you want to have any crime happen to you or in your area, but these are ones that they're violent. And it says they've reached unprecedented numbers in the last 2 years, with murders increasing by nearly 30%. 30%. That's a big number, man. It says New York City has so far seen the largest increase in violent crimes out of the cities, a 40.6 increase compared to 2021, a 40%. 43,000 violent crime incidents compared to so far this year compared to last year's 30,000. So big increase. Chicago shows similar data detailing an increase in violent crimes, a 35% increase compared to last year's records. Wow. 35%, 40%. This is not a small percentage of change. This is a massive percentage of change. Chicago's recorded, at the time of this report, 194 homicides on the year, which went down. It actually went down. Good job, Chicago. It went down. It's 194 instead of 207. It went down. I mean, good job. Better than going up by 40%. I'd hardly call that progress, though. What about violent crimes in Seattle? In Seattle, they've shot up 23% so far just this year. 23% this year. Homicides have increased by more than 54%. Homicides, 54%. Citywide shootings and shots fired increased by 82%. I'm going to say that one again. This is Seattle. Homicides are up 54%, and citywide shootings and shots fired have increased by 82%. That is just insanity. Los Angeles isn't doing so well, seeing crimes rise in all 3 categories. Violent crime shot up by 6.7%, which don't sound so bad compared to Seattle. Violent crimes are up 23%. We see homicides increased by 1.6% versus Seattle's 54%. We saw shots fired increased by 1.5%, up by 82% in Seattle. So LA is not looking so bad. Now, I will say that there's a lot more crime going on in Los Angeles than is in this report. This is just violent crimes, shots fired, homicides, etc. They've decriminalized a lot of stuff in Los Angeles. So while we're seeing a lot of violent crime, it's just not called violent crime anymore. So they changed that. Washington, D.C., total violent crimes increased by 21%. Homicides only increased by 4%. Not only, but still 4%. Philadelphia, violent crimes have increased by almost 5%. You get the idea. I could sit here and keep reading this data to you, but why? Why is crime rising so hard? I mean, every day, obviously depending on where you're looking, but if you go on Twitter at all, you can see this stuff. It's all boots on the ground reporting, and you can see every single day are new attacks at airport baggage claims, subway stations, convenience stores, etc. I mean, every single day I see this information. I see these videos of this stuff happening. Why? Well, it's happening for a bunch of reasons. Ultimately, it comes from a breakdown in the money supply. It perverts everything. It also has to do with the incentives. So, when people are broke, they act out for sure. The Democrats want to blame red states. They say it's the red states. California Governor Gavin Newsom recently said he was going to break down, quote, America's red state murder problem, which is pretty funny that he would say that. It's the soft on crime policies that seem to be the problem. As a matter of fact, this week we saw a report about these green goblins. If you've heard about this, I had just heard about this. This is in New York. These green goblin games, they show up dressed in these like green tight suits, and they call themselves green goblins, and they show up in gangs, neon green full body suits, and they attack people on the subways. And they attack people on the subways and steal from them, assault them, things like that. And then they just walk right out of jail. So there was Mariam Issouf, 26 years old, a member of this Green Goblin crew, assaulted and robbed 2 teens on the subway on October 2nd, charged with violent felony, and then no bail, just walked right out. She walked out of the court. And so what's happening is that we're soft on crime and we're continuing to release these people. And if there's no consequence to you beating people up and stealing from them, then what do you think happens? That's right. More people getting beat up and more people stealing from them. That's exactly what happens. The society is breaking down. The world is changing. The world that we have known is not the world that we are going into any longer. We can see California's home to 3 of the 10 worst cities for retail crime. And this is kind of what I was talking about. They've decriminalized a lot of this. And so now it's home to 3. The state has 3 of the 10 worst cities for retail crime. Smash and grabs plague the state, as they say. According to the National Retail Federation, 3 California cities are among the 10 most affected cities for organized retail crime. Those are Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Sacramento. Of course, very, 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 very blue hotbeds for sure. And it makes it very difficult for store owners to be there. So, of course, what happens? Then the stores break down. The stores have to close up. The stores close up. The people that have any money don't want to live in a violent area, and especially don't want to live in an area that's violent and has no stores or services available because all the stores had to close up. And what do? They move out of the area. We've talked about this before in terms of San Francisco, and it's caused a massive problem. What's happening here in California is we have the rise of these flash mob style robberies. And they used to just show up in a flash mob and start dancing and singing, and now they show up and start robbing. So again, this is a direct result of the monetary system breaking down, and it shows just how quickly the system that we know is going to change. Now, change is hard, change is scary, but I believe we need the change, and what's on the other side of it is good. It's hopeful. Some of this information is bad. I get it. I'm sorry. It's not doom and gloom. There is hope. What we're seeing is coming to an end, and there is hope on the other end. You're listening to the Mark Moss Show. We're talking about the decentralized revolution, the way the world is changing from centralization central planning that's failing us, into a world of decentralization, back into a system like we used to have. You're listening to The Mark Moss Show. That's what I got for you this week. Thanks so much for listening.